Okay, thank you for joining us today. This is pool session number 2, or out of pool school, everybody calls 101, which I like to call 91 or maybe 89, because we do not get technical at all. We're not trying to impress anybody. We're trying to give you some basic, detailed information for the neophyte that perhaps just moved into the pool or had it built, no instructions. And as much as anything, what we're doing is giving you a basic overview of how things work, but really putting the emphasis on what not to do and what to watch out for in hopes of avoiding some kind of a error or oversight that will cost money, kind of like not changing the oil in your car on time or something like that. You don't have to understand fluid dynamics, you just need to know that there's a time to do something and what to watch out for. So that's what we'll talk about today. Now, the last session we just covered, if you haven't seen it, you need to see it to make this fit together. But anyway, the last session had to do with just the pool proper itself, the swimming pool that you're standing there looking at that's shining and shimmering, and you saw the skimmer and the main drain in the bottom and the little jet or jets that bring the water back into the pool. Now, what we're doing here today in this session at this time is we're bringing the water over to the pump, which pushes it on into the filter and does the cleaning up. And basically what I've done right here is kind of cover a scenario where we've got maybe 2 skimmers and a main drain, and we can say, well, this valve here we determined works 1 skimmer, this is the other skimmer, and this is the main drain. Now, don't be fooled, don't be confused if you show up and you move in somewhere, or maybe you've moved in and you have 2 skimmers, and then you see you've got a main drain and you come over here to the pump and there's only 1 pipe coming up. It can be done like that because there are gadgets, assemblies that'll go down in the skimmer and work on adjusting the skimmers, and you have a way of connecting the main drain and skimmers underground so that you only bring up 1 pipe over here to 1 valve, but you still have these other assemblies there. But you can cover that, and I'd recommend if you have something that's that not complicated, but it may be for you, but if you have something of that nature where you've got 2 or 3 things and 1 pipe here that and maybe some other issues as well, that you have somebody to come and do a pool site visit and go through all the things and what you do and what does this and that. But basically you'll learn here today that what we're doing, how all of this actually works. Now, okay, so we've said this right here is 1 skimmer, this is the other skimmer, and that's the main drain. It comes on in, and then you have this basket here. And you remember when we talked about the skimmer, you'll know that everything that gets through the skimmer or comes in through the main drain makes its way into this basket. So sooner or later, you've got to shut the system down, empty the basket, put it back in, and take up and get going again. And here's what you would do. Now, one of the things you need to determine too is where is the level of the water at your equipment pad with relation to your pool. Because if you, and those of you that have already emptied this basket, if you take the lid off and you hear the water going gurgle, 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 and it runs back down, you know that you're above the water level, and water does seek its own level and it goes back. But if you open it up and the water stays at this level, then you know where it is pretty much at the pool, or if it floods, you have what we call a flooded suction. That's beside the point. I'm talking to you about how actually all this works out. So what I like to do before you service the pump, service the basket, obviously you have to cut the motor off. Don't open this up without, or don't even attempt to open it up without turning the motor off. Now, what you'll wind up doing, most of you will, on the pool that you would have elevation-wise, you turn the pump off and you close these valves so that the water doesn't go back into the pool or doesn't come out here and flood and run out and make a mess. I personally like to, and this is what this depicts here, is this configuration here is what we refer to as a header, and I like to call this a main header valve. You already have these set where the skimmers and main drain work, so you turn the pump off, and then you would close this valve here, and that shuts it and captures the water and holds it at that level, no matter what the elevation is where. So to empty the pump basket, that would take care of that. Now, let me just say a word about the pump here real quick. The pump actually requires no lubrication maintenance of any kind. It actually has its seal bearings. You don't do anything to it, but you do want to keep trash away from it. And you'll find some little slots, 2 sets of slots. Sometimes they're here, sometimes they're here and back here, but regardless, there's a fan on the shaft that pulls air through there and keeps the motor cooled down and prevents from overheating. So, and it doesn't mean you have to go out there 4 or 5 times a day and make sure nothing's here. Just kind of keep an eye on this as you're doing, because a lot of times we have the pump and the filter installed in the back 40 where it's out of sight, and you're running a string trimmer back there and stuff accumulates, maybe lint from the dryer or something like that. But anyway, let's say you have a sand filter, okay? What you would do is turn the pump off, and then once the pump is turned off, you'd close either the main header valve or all of those valves, and you have a setting on your multiport valve that says closed. So you would then put it to closed, and then take the top off, and then pull the basket out. And now, before you pull the basket out, a lot of times you'll see water will come up to the top, and there'll be little beetles or bugs or pieces of floating stuff on there. You have to understand what is driving the water in the pump. Basically, you don't want anything to bypass the basket by lifting it up like that. You knock it out. And the reason being is this. You need to think of the pump being the heart. This is the beating part of the heart. And if you take a look at this, you see these little swirly lines. These are what we call veins. And this is the eye of the impeller, and it's below level, and this is flooded in here, and when the motor is turned, this thing is turning, and it's turning almost 60 times a second, which is pretty fast. And in so doing, water's being slung out around the circumference of the impeller, and that's what creates the suction here. So the suction then will grab everything that comes through the basket and goes up that's making its way towards the pump. Towards the filter. Now, a moment ago I said you don't want things to bypass the basket, so if you have a large something, whatever floats up with it, just take your hand and knock it off, because if you don't, and you lift this up and that water goes over and takes that big piece of beetle or little wood chip that's saturated, logged, or whatever it is, and then once the pump is turned back on, and it sucks that in there, and then you get that little piece of whatever it is inside here, it makes a big difference on the efficiency of the pump. So you've got this thing still turning 60 times a second, and it's moving pretty fast, of course, but you just don't have the suction that you normally have because you've got something clogging up the vein or veins inside here. So you want to definitely avoid that, and that's what you would do. Additionally, if you get this thing, if you just don't service this at all and leave it collect a bunch of stuff in it, or don't pay attention to what's going on, and the water level drops in the pool, and you just you're not moving any water, lose the prime, there's any number of things that can happen. This impeller creates a lot. This is the cutaway here. Obviously, your pump is not this. This is the impeller here, looking at it from a side view. But as this impeller turns and what water remains in here, even though there's not enough to keep it going, it's just lost its prime and it's turning, it creates one whale of a lot of heat. An enormous amount of heat. By the time you take this off, a lot of times you may even see steam coming up out of there. Let me just give you an idea of what can happen in there. This was brought in by a technician in our service department, and look at the distortion that this has happened, that the heat from the water has actually melted and distorted this basket. And here's another one that's got the same thing, only you can see that it's a little more distorted than that one. And here's another one here that's gone even further than that. You almost don't recognize it as a basket, but my favorite of all is this guy right here. It looks like a dishcloth that you started to wring and twist out. And look here, you see this shiny part right here? This actually was what was rubbing into the eye of the impeller. The whole thing was going in there. It was going to really be a mess. Here's one right here that doesn't quite get that way, but I think this makes a real case in point that what you have here is the impeller, and this basket right here literally goes with this one, and you can see how this was melted down, and this was getting soft, and I guess if it was left alone long enough, it would suck this straight on into there. You don't want this because actually what happens, you've not just messed up a basket and replaced a basket, but there's an internal mechanism inside here. There's a seal and some other things, so now you got to take it apart. And to give you an idea of what I'm talking about with the seal, this is what we refer to as a rotary seal. It's two pieces, and you can see the light through this, and this is a cavity. This is where the shaft of the motor goes through there and attaches to the impeller, and it's turning. Now the important thing to understand is these two surfaces are, I guess for lack of a better word, I can say it's perfectly flat, and there's a spring mechanism here, and as they push together, it prevents water from leaking out, but it allows the impeller to turn without actually creating a gap. Now, this thing is again getting back to the point, this thing goes almost 60 times a second. Well, there's a lot of friction there, but the water that's going through there keeps it cool and lubricated. But when you lose that prime, or the water's not moving through there, you're stuffed full of junk in the basket, and it's just sitting there running, this surface gets hot, and this speed that it's turning at without being lubricated, it sort of compromises that, and it's not 100% seal. It leaks, so to speak. And the first sign of a leaking seal, the first sign typically, is it stays damp down here. And it doesn't necessarily, and I'm not talking about when you empty this or open it up, you spill water, that's not it. But when you're out here looking at it and it's running, you haven't opened it up and it's damp, I can promise you that the seal is leaking. Now it may not be, don't think about the amount of water that you're losing. It has nothing to do with the amount of water you're losing. It has to do with where this water is. And this is a clear indication, a symptom of a leaking seal. Now, if the seal is not changed pretty soon, water will go down into the pump, and it'll just get in there, a little drip, and this heavily treated water is going to mess up the inside of the motor, and you'll have to replace it. So for lack of a $25 or $30 seal, maybe $35, I don't know, for lack of that seal, a properly functioning seal, the whole motor is lost. So now you're into paying $200, $300, maybe $400 to replace a motor. So when you see this damp, it's telling you something's going on. Now it doesn't always get a little damp like that. It may start dripping a lot quicker, and you just don't start off with a little bit of dampness. So basically, if you see any water down here, damp, dripping, wet, or whatever, the seal's gone, turn it off, don't run it. Get somebody to change the seal for you. It's not a big thing to do, but it's very important that you do it. And as I said, that water with the chlorine in it and the chemical treatment stuff makes a big difference. This is what the front of the motor, when I say the front of the motor, this is this part right here that's painted this almond color. And this is what it looks like before it's processed at the factory, before it's painted. You see how nice and clean and shiny, so to speak, this is? Okay, well, after the seal leaks and comes in there, here's what's happening to the motor. You can see the difference and see the corrosion and everything that you have here that accompanies that chlorinated water, and you can imagine the same stuff that's leaked down through the shaft into the motor for lack of a seal. It creates a big problem. Now, I spent a lot of time with that, but the reason being is because this is a pretty common thing, and sadly enough, this is what causes most pumps to mess up, is just for the lack of the seal. It's not lightning striking or anything like that. It's just the seal and a little proper maintenance and keeping the basket emptied. I can tell you this, that you will cut, if you've had your pool for some time, you know that you spend a lot of time scratching and picking and getting this and trying to clean it out and finally just give up and drop in and start it. If you'll get yourself an extra basket, have 2 baskets, then when you shut the pump down, you take the basket that's here, and it's got all the little woody stuff, and sometimes they look like porcupines with all the little pine needles or this or that and stuff sticking out through the little opening. Put it in your shed or garage or somewhere where it won't get rained on, And then the next time before you get ready to put it, and then put the clean one in and you can start back up. So next time you get ready, you say, okay, I'm gonna change my basket tomorrow. Just get the basket that you put in there the last week or 10 days or 2 weeks before. It's all good and dry, turn it upside down, give it a little bang like that 2 or 3 times. Well, you just about got rid of 90 or 95% of the stuff. Then with one of these little pump basket brushes, they have little stainless or brass bristles on them. You give them a little of this, do that. You're going to turn, which was an arduous, time-consuming exercise, in down to maybe a couple of minutes, something like that. Clean it, put it on, take the one that's wet and got all the stuff in it, put it up, repeat the process next time. That extra basket is going to save you a lot of time. And our retail stores stock these little brushes for that very purpose. Okay, now I mention all this because, like I said, this is really a pretty expensive guy if you go to having replacement and something done like that, and usually it's just from plain old carelessness. Very rarely is it where it's worn out. Like I said, but keep an eye on the trash and stuff that's down here. Matter of fact, this right here represents a very good, if you want to think of it as a model way to mount the motor, this is up on a 4-inch cement block. Well, it gets it up off of the slab, so again, the stuff that's the wind's blowing across the grass, this represents your concrete slab that everything's on. So this raises it up, so whatever you're knocking up with a string trimmer or blows across the lawn, you've got this elevated up, so it's going to miss a lot of it. But there is a very mild movement of air here, and you'll want to do something about it, okay? Now, if you have any questions about this, we're always available to help you answer these things, and you can go to our Facebook page, the Memphis Pool Facebook page, and our YouTube channel, and you can ask these questions and find some answers there. Okay, I don't want to take too much time with that because now we want to get on, but this is something that's common with everybody. You got a pump. Now you can have different kinds of filters. What this cutaway here is, it's basically a sand filter, and you find more sand filtration in the southeast down in this part of the world than you do anywhere else, because water is not so much an expensive commodity and a premium as it would be in some places like a desert area, California or something like that, where there are other things that are put to use for filtration. And this is the tank, and inside the filter tank would be sand. Now this is not place sand that you buy at the bags at the hardware store or building supply. These are bags of a graded silica type medium that goes in there. And when the filter valve is set on filter, the water is pushed out in the top of the tank and is down through, and the sand catches all the stuff. And in the bottom of the filter is this is all connected by some piping, but I don't want to get into fine parts of everything. And this is what we call the under drain, and these little pieces are laterals. And if you look at your lateral in the bottom of your filter, it's got some very fine slots in it, and all this holds the sand and lets the water into the laterals, and then it comes back, it's transferred back up to a pipe that makes its way back up into the filter valve. So it's the filtered, clean filtered water, and that's the water that's distributed out through the inlets in different parts of your pool, wherever they happen to be located. Now, after a period of time, you're going to have the sand is going to get a certain amount of load, and you got to clean it. And the process is known as backwash. And basically, you turn the pump off. Always turn the pump off before you change this valve, do anything. Again, turn the pump off, push the handle and turn it to backwash, and then turn it on. And what that does is reverses the flow of water in the tank, so it comes out at the bottom and stirs it and gets all this dirt and crud and junk, little pieces of particulate matter that's been trapped in there, and it goes out the top and goes on and is directed into the sewer. Now, after you backwash, you really can backwash. We'll talk about the length of time in a moment, but more often than not, after you backwash the adequate amount of time, there's always just some little something that may be left down in the bottom of the filter. So there's a setting that's on here that says rinse. So you push it down and turn it to rinse, and then turn it on for about 30 seconds, and that takes the water through the filtration cycle. But rather than let the water go back to the jets, it goes on out to waste. So any little stuff that's with it takes it out. If you ever want to test this out sometime after you backwash your filter, don't rinse it. Put it back on. Put it back on filter. Excuse me. Don't put it back on. Don't put it on rinse, but go from backwash to filter, and then run back over to the pool and stand over the jet that's closer to the pump, and you'll probably see what appears to be a little cloudy, dusty looking cloudy, something that goes in. That's the stuff that would go out through rinse. Now, how long do I backwash? Well, you know, you ask pool guys, you ask five, I always, like I said before, you ask 5 people the same question, you get 7 different answers. So typically, you'll get things anywhere from 3 to 5, maybe 6 minutes. I always just say, look, backwash it for 5 minutes and then put it on rinse for 10 seconds, then put it back on filter. That's pretty much does it. There's another setting that says waste. And what that is when you have a lot of rain, you have too much water in the pool so that the skimmers don't operate well. You have to get rid of some water, and sometimes you're lucky and it's time to backwash, so you can use some of that rainwater to backwash. But when you don't do that, then you have to put it on waste and just turn it on, and it pumps it from the pump to the valve and on out to waste until you get it down to that level that's in there. I will tell you this, you have to be very careful about backwashing too often, because the filter, after it runs for a day or two, it's just like your air conditioning filter, your furnace filter. It's a little more efficient after it's run a little bit than when you first do it. So you don't want to do it too often. I mean, I've talked to people who have water problems before. I said, well, when was you backwash? Man, I'm backwashing 4 or 5 times a day. I say, stop. You don't need to do that. You're not letting your filter get to the point where it's operating efficiently. You have to let it do that. So they say, well, how will I know when to backwash? Well, that's what these pressure gauges on your filter are for. If you have a sand filter or diatomaceous earth or a cartridge filter, it's the same reason. It's on there to tell you when. So after you backwash and rinse and go back to filter, you look and see what the pressure is, and just make a note or write it down if you need to, and just clean pressure. And let's say it's 8. Well, then you want to let it run until it gets about another 10 pounds. So clean pressure plus 10, that's about the time to backwash. So if you had 8, you need to get out there maybe 18, 20 pounds, something like that, and go ahead and backwash it. That's an indication of that. Now, all of them won't be the same pressure after you backwash, because some people have a little longer run of piping. There's some hydraulics that'll differ in that. Now, some of you, so you have filter, backwash, rinse, drain, and there's one setting that says recirculate, and what that does, it goes from the pool to the pump to the valve and back. And this is what you would use sometimes to mix certain chemical additives depending on what you're treating your water for or what's going on. And that's what you would do there. Now, those of you that have a top-mounted valve, you got the same thing working inside. You just don't have the external hookups on the outside of the tank, but you've got the same thing basically taking place in there. You can get the owner's manual or go online and get the manufacturer and see how the diffuser works, how it sprays the water out in the bottom. It does essentially the same thing. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy, and if you take care of them, what happens is people talk about the sand wearing out. Well, you don't really wear the sand out, but what's in the sand, typically what's in the pool are the people, and with people you have sunscreen, body oils, makeup, cosmetics, that kind of thing, and sometime between that and oil and lint and stuff, you just almost glue it and goo it together. What you can do to help your filter work, there's one product called sand scrubber, and this sand scrubber is a liquid. I mean, this is something that really pays for itself, because what you do with the sand scrubbers when you're backwashing, you take the top off and go to your skimmer. Now, you only do this every other time you backwash, and you pour about 8 ounces down into the skimmer, and as that water comes in the bottom and it's stirring the sand, lifting it up and kind of moving it around a little bit, this sand scrubber works on knocking a lot of these oils and cosmetics and stuff out of there. So what the bottom line is, when you use something like sand scrubber, you don't have to backwash it as often, because when you backwash, you're losing water, so then you got to come back and you've got to put makeup water in there and you got to put chemicals in. So this actually costs less than the water does in the long run that you would be doing. It's one of those things, like I said, that pays for itself. Okay, so let's see, that pretty well takes care of the sand filter. The other things become really popular over the years in our part of the country is a cartridge filter. And this is a cutaway of a cartridge filter here, and you see this tank has 4 cartridges in it, and you can see the pleats. And if you want to take a little close look at the pleats, here's one here, and you can see the pleats there. Now, the number of pleats and the number of cartridges that are in the filter have to do with the volume of the turnover. For example, in a sand filter, we size the sand filter based on having it's a certain circumference, and each square foot can have anywhere from I think they say maybe 15 to 20 gallons per minute per square foot. But here again, you can look and see what your manufacturer says it is. Now on cartridges, you don't get the 15 to 20 gallons per minute per square foot. So that's why you've got a lot of folds of these cartridges. You got a lot of square feet inside here, but you don't have that same amount of water going through each square foot. It's a lot less. So you have to add the square footage on there. That's what you do. One thing that I have found that helps with cartridges is, and I don't have any specific numbers yet, but I will in a year or so, is that people will take the cartridges out and they'll hose them, soak them, do this, that, and then put them back in, get going. Well, that shortens the life of the cartridge. I found out that if you have 2 sets of cartridges, and you take one set out and you soak them and do what the manufacturer says to do to degrease them or whatever it is, then hose them and then put them and let them dry. The fabric that makes these up is a little bit, I can't remember any technical terms, but it's almost like it gets kind of puffy and drier and does a better job of filtering than if you take it and put it back in the tank wet and turn it back on. So if you have 2 sets of filters, 2 sets of cartridges, whether it's 1 cartridge filter or 4 or whatever, if you have 2 sets, you take one out and you put the clean dry set in there, button the tank back up, you're underway. If you do that and then you go through the cleaning and drying process in maybe 10 days, 2 weeks, or whatever it is, you reverse the process, you're going to go far longer than you would 1 set. You may go through 3 or 4 sets. And again, I don't have any hard and fast numbers, but I can tell you for sure that you will more than double the life of the filter doing that. Another issue we see people dealing with on these tanks sometimes that are 2 pieces is this clamping mechanism that holds it together. Is they'll put it back together and then they'll tighten this down and then start it up and it leaks, and they'll tighten the nut some more and it'll tighten, and then pretty soon you've stripped this thing out. So what you need to do, you're not tightening it uniformly all the way around. So I can tell you that what will save you some time and a lot of money, because these clamps, as the guy would say, they ain't cheap. So these clamps, if you treat them right, they're going to be your friend and work. So you put it together and get it down without tightening it, and before you put any more pressure on it, let's say this is 12 o'clock, you bump this at 6 o'clock, 3 and 9, and then it'll push it in a little bit further, tighten it a little bit more, bump it again, time or 2 or 3, and tighten it. So what you're doing, rather than pulling these 2 ends together, you're sort of circumferentially bringing the whole thing in. So you tighten it up, and you can do that without straining and messing the clamp up, because this bolt that's in here is a captive bolt nut, so there's no such thing as going and getting a new bolt nut and this and that and fix it. You wind up buying the whole clamp, and this is an engineered clamp. It's stainless steel. And again, it ain't a cheap thing. You're going to find out that. So that'd be what I'd tell you about doing that. Okay, now let's address diatomaceous earth filtration. You don't find very much in this part of the country, but it is a very good form of filtration. It gets out very fine particles, does a great job. The problem, the shortcoming is that the diatomaceous earth is a silica type material, which is hazardous if inhaled. That's why you see guys that are doing sandblasting and stuff like that, they wear all these aspirators and things. And if you have a diatomaceous earth filter and you've opened the tank up before, you know how to charge the filter and do that. But if you've opened it up before, you know what it can be like. That diatomaceous earth is settled down in here. It's almost like you've poured concrete in the bottom of this thing, so you have to wrestle it and pull it out and hose it and go through with it. I want to tell you something else that you'll like. If you get this from us and you don't like it, we'll give you your money back. Cellulose fibers, you've got to remember that, and it's just what it says it is. It's cellulose, which is an environmentally friendly thing. I mean, it deteriorates, breaks down, but this diatomaceous earth is like putting sand and grit and stuff in your waste system. It doesn't go away, so to speak. But the cellulose fibers do a better job on those grids that you have. So you're ahead of the thing there, but it tells you for so many square feet. And by the way, you can go to our store, as I've said, you can go to our places and get a sample of this the cellulose fibers. It's fluffy little stuff, and it tells you on the bag if you have for how many square feet you have. You use so many little scoops of this stuff, you put it in your skimmer, it actually floats, you can wet it, do it like that. It comes down and it coats those grids that you have, and it catches the same stuff, does a very good job of doing that. And when you backwash it, it's gone. It flushes and gets out of there. It's not heavy and cementous type in nature and settle down like the grids. I've personally worked with several people over the last 4 or 5 years that have gone from diatomaceous earth to cellulose fibers, and not one has. We get real rave reviews about that. So anyway, try that if you're a diatomaceous earth person. Okay, that concludes the items and the issues that we wanted to touch about today, and we hope that you found a lot of this useful, new, and interesting, and we thank you for taking the time to tune in on us and see what we're up to and what we can do, and I hope this has been useful to you. Memphis Pool, speaking on behalf of Memphis Pool, I can tell you we appreciate your patronage, we appreciate your interest. We're well over 50 years old, a very old concern in the southeastern U.S. We do construction, remodeling, we have retail outlets, and can pretty well take care of just about anything you have. You can visit us at any time on our Facebook page and the YouTube channel. And we ask that you let us know what you think, what you like, and what issues or items you'd like for us to touch on as we have future productions. Meanwhile, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.